All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Shannon Sowell, and I work for Washington University Libraries Advancement, raising money to support the resources that our students, faculty, and staff use to facilitate learning and research. I also work with donors to the libraries whose interest lies with our special collections, such as the one we will talk about today. You are in for a treat with today's webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some Zoom housekeeping. As everyone entered the webinar, you will note that microphones are muted and your video cameras are turned off. This session is being recorded, so you had to consent to being recorded to stay in the session. Please feel free to use the chat function to make comments throughout, or if you have any tech issues. Chat is not part of the recording. To pose a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can pose an anonymous question by selecting my name, Shannon Sowell, in the chat box instead of everyone. And with that housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce our speakers, Joel Miner, Greg Gerke, and Ted Morrissey. Joel Miner is the curator of the Modern Literature Collection and Manuscripts at Washington University in St. Louis. In 2 William H. Gass readings, a number of Gass-related events and promotions, and The Soul Inside the Sentence, a life-spanning exhibition on William H. Gass that he curated in 2013, also online. Before coming to Washington University in 2012, he was an archivist at the Southwestern Writers Collection at Texas State University, San Marcos, and before that, the archivist for the Oglala Lakota College on the Pine Ridge Reservation. He lives in University City, Missouri with his family and pets. Greg Gerke's work has appeared in Tin House, Film Quarterly, The Kenyon Review, and other publications. See What I See, a book of essays, and especially The Bad Things, stories, were both published by Splice. Zero Gram Press will release a new and expanded version of See What I See in April 2021. Greg interviewed William H. Gass in 2011 and has published a number of pieces on Gass's work, many being collected in See What I See. Greg writes fiction and essays and lives in Brooklyn with his wife and daughter. Ted Morrissey is an award-winning novelist and short story writer whose fiction, poetry, essays, and reviews have appeared in more than 80 publications. He holds a PhD in English Studies from Illinois State University. For more than a decade, Ted has devoted much of his teaching and academic life to promoting the work of William H. Gass, delivering numerous conference papers, publishing reviews of Middle C and the William H. Gass Reader, including Gass's work in syllabi reading lists, and hosting the Tunnel at 25 online symposium. Ted teaches high school English and is a lecturer in Lindenwood University's MFA in Writing program. Without further ado, join me in virtually welcoming Ted, Greg, and Joel, who will get us started on celebrating the 25th anniversary of The Tunnel.
Thank you, Shannon. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to William H. Gass, his novel, The Tunnel, and the related resources we have at Washington University Libraries. Then Greg, Ted, and I will discuss Gass and The Tunnel and the 25th anniversary website, which we all three contributed to. We'll leave some time at the end for audience questions, so be sure to type in those in the Q&A box as Shannon instructed. And we will also be providing links to important websites in the chat box, so be on the lookout for those a little bit later too. All of the images in the following slideshow are from our digital exhibit, The Soul Inside the Sentence, and the original items were either donated to us or loaned to us by Bill and Mary Gass. William Gass was born in Fargo, North Dakota, but his family soon moved to Warren, Ohio, where he grew up. Gass described his father as a bitter man and mentally abusive, and his mother as passive and an alcoholic. He escaped into books and knew from junior high on that he wanted to be a writer, but he said he was not precocious. Decades later, he would employ fictionalized versions of his parents in The Tunnel. On the left here, you see a scan of On Reading, an essay from his high school newspaper. This was Gass's first published essay. He mentions the importance of the reader giving their heart, soul, and mind to the author, and the author offering to reach forth and take the reader. This kind of direct relationship between the author and reader was something Gass would explore throughout his fiction, and nonfiction, and he mentions this essay in The Tunnel. He was drafted in 1943 after completing a year of college and became a communications officer in the Pacific Theater. He hated military life, and again, he escaped into books and opera records. He was in the Sea of Japan for the surrender, and you can see his official wallet card souvenir there on this slide from VJ Day. He went on leave in Japan in the newly occupied country and wrote letters from there, some of which are in the soul inside the sentence. And also in that digital exhibit is My Memories of the Service, an essay that Gass wrote exclusively for that. After the service, he finished his education at Kenyon College and Cornell University, where he earned a PhD in philosophy in 1954. A copy of his dissertation, A Philosophical Investigation of Metaphor, is in his papers here, and the first 10 pages are in the digital exhibit. While earning his PhD, he taught at Worcester College and then at Purdue University for 16 years, where he became a full professor in 1966, the same year his first novel, Omensetter's Luck, was published. He came to WashU as a full professor in 1969 and was installed as David May Distinguished University Professor in the Humanities in 1979. In 1999, upon his retirement, he became emeritus. On this slide, we see one of the numerous teaching awards that Gass received both at Purdue and WashU, and below that, the David May Medal. Gass also had numerous visiting professorships and received honorary degrees from 5 universities. Perhaps Gass's crowning achievement at WashU was directing the IWC, the International Writers Center, which he helped establish in 1990. Its mission was to, quote, build on the strengths of its resident and visiting faculty writers, to serve as a focal point for writing excellence in all disciplines and in all cultures, to be a directory for writers and writing programs at Washington University, in St. Louis, the United States, and around the world, and to present the writer to the reader, unquote. In its 11 years, the IWC brought to WashU over 50 writers from 20 different countries, including 4 Nobel laureates, for conferences, readings, and other programming. The IWC collaborated with WashU Libraries, River Styx, and Metro Transit St. Louis, among others, and it became the Center for Humanities in 2003. As accomplished as Gass was as an educator, his most lasting legacy will be as a writer. He was both an accomplished fiction and nonfiction writer. He preferred to be known for the former, but he said it was harder, so he did it less. Much of his work, though, blurs the line between these two genres. He was known for writing metafiction, a term he actually coined himself and something he championed in other writers' work as an important art form. What is metafiction, you might ask? Think of it as fiction within fiction. Characters may be creating their own fictions or even engaging the reader with their inner dialogues. Metafiction explores the limitations of consciousness and narrative. Its characters may have elusive identities because of their reliance on words and thoughts over actions. You can see listed on this slide some of his many literary awards, honors, and memberships, including being in the Modern Literature Collection. So the MLC was started in 1964 by WashU Libraries and creative writing faculty, including Mona Van Dyne and Stanley Elkin. They identified poets and fiction writers who may have been on the cusp of greatness and whose literary papers were not being collected already by other institutions. Even though he hadn't yet published a book in 1964, Gass was one of the original 15 writers that the group approached first. He initially resisted with his characteristic self-deprecating humor, but Mona Van Dyne persisted, and so he started sending drafts of Omensetter's Luck, that first novel, and continued to donate to us generously over the years since then. Much later, in 1999, Gass took his turn in helping to build the MLC by initiating the acquisition of the papers of his friend and fellow postmodern fiction writer, William Gaddis. So now we come to The Tunnel. This novel was published in February 1995, after nearly 30 years of work on it, and 26 years of publishing and adapting excerpts from it. He finished the book as a visiting scholar at the Getty Institute in the early 1990s. The book is presented as being written by the narrator, a book within a book, so metafiction. Gass wanted to publish it as an unbound manuscript in a paper bag, or have the book wrapped in an armband or with pop-ups inside. But working with major publishing house, he had to compromise. Nevertheless, the book is rich with graphics and typographical flourishes. We see here a page from the first edition, the penance of passive attitudes and emotions that the narrator, William Kohler, devises, and which precedes the text of the novel. Kohler is a professor at a small Midwestern university who hides in the writing of this book, in which he is exposing himself utterly. This is one of the countless existential contradictions that Gass explores and expresses throughout. A number of the excerpts won various awards. The book divided critics, though. It did win the American Book Award and was a finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction. Lastly, I want to provide you with some resources if you're interested in exploring more about Gass. First and foremost is the Modern Literature Collection Author's Research Guide, which is the place to go for accessing all the rest of the resources listed on this slide. And so the most important one to bookmark, and we will provide that link to you in the chat. I'll also click on it here to take us there as I talk. You can also get to it at library.wusel.edu and searching for Gass there, and it should be the first result you get. So after the biography on the research guide, you'll see links to 2 finding aids, the William H. Gass papers, which contain the main primary resource materials such as correspondence, manuscripts, material towards books, personal papers, ephemera, and more. And the International Writers Center archive, which was donated to us when the IWC closed, and includes even more Gass correspondence and records related to all of IWC's activities. After that, we have cataloged items. So these are links to the lists of over 500 books, periodicals, and other published materials authored by Gass or with content by him or where he is the subject. Under digital content, you'll see a link there to the soul inside the sentence. As mentioned earlier, an important place to go for digital surrogates of all types from all major aspects of his life and work. We also have their Gass playlists, IWC playlists on our YouTube channel. After that, our list of blog posts related to Gass, 16 and counting so far. These are kind of closer looks at our resources with links, including William H. Gass' Life and Legacy, which has his daughter Catherine's fantastic slideshow, which she put together for the 2018 memorial here. And lastly, on this page, you'll see additional resources. So these are external websites that we think are worth your time to check out, including the Tunnel at 25, an online symposium, which is a good segue into our discussion that we're going to have with Ted Morrissey and Greg Gerke. So Ted and Greg, if you would join us or join me, we can get into the next phase of the event today, and looking forward to you guys sharing some thoughts. So thanks for joining us. I thought I would start by asking both of you to maybe give a little, a memory you have of first encountering Gass, first reading him, and what your first impressions were. Ted, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, by the way, for inviting me here. It's quite an honor to talk about the master on the 25th anniversary of the publication of The Tunnel. I'm a little embarrassed to say that I came to Gass rather late in life. I had a midlife crisis and got a doctorate. It probably was about the same as buying a Corvette at the time, but I really enjoyed that process. But I didn't encounter Gass's work until I was working on my PhD, and actually was far along in the process. And I was kind of gearing up to actually write the dissertation when I gathered a bunch of material together that I thought might be useful. And one of the things that I got hold of was the Norton Anthology of Postmodern Fiction. And just sort of thumbing through it, I I ran across this weird looking story with this weird title called In the Heart of the Country. And just a few sentences into it, I was absolutely absorbed by the language, and loved it. And then, as luck would have it, just a week or so later, I was in Chicago at the AWP conference, where they gave a tribute to William Gass, and he was there and gave a reading. And so, on the heels of having been bewitched by In the Heart of the Country, I got to hear him read in person, and that was pretty much it. I've been devoted to Gass and his work, from that first reading, but particularly that first live reading in Chicago in 2009.
That's great. How about you, Greg? What are your thoughts on your first
Thank
impressions?
you. Sure. Thank you for having me. My only writing teacher for fiction just brought out one of his stories one day, and it's the same story that Ted just referenced, the novella In the Heart of the Country. And I think I was 25 at the time, so it was startling. And from there, though, I kind of lost. I didn't go onward. I didn't go into the essays. And a few years later, I saw him read in New York City for the Tunnel audiobook. Again, though, I still didn't. And then 5 years later, people pointed me to the essays, and then all the fiction, and I was all in. And it was kind of like discovering having an MFA. And I didn't have an MFA, but it was like an MFA class, because Gass tells you who to read, how to read them, Henry James, Wallace Stevens, Gertrude Stein, and it was a incredibly enlightening experience.
That's great, and that's something I wanted to ask you both next as well. How did Gass influence your life, your careers as readers and writers? You're both writers yourselves. You're both, I would say, scholars and appreciators of literature. So what are your thoughts on when you think back at his lasting influence on your own work?
Well, he's had an impact on just about every aspect of my life, particularly my professional life. As far as my teaching goes, he hasn't necessarily affected my delivery in the classroom, but I have consistently been putting Gass's work on my various reading lists over the last 10 years or so. And students are always startled and amazed, and sometimes a little afraid, but it's really an exciting experience, given my love of Gass, to be able to introduce them to new readers who've never experienced him before. So that's exciting. As far as my academic work for the last decade, he's essentially all I've worked on in terms of presenting conference papers and writing reviews and that sort of thing. My ambition is to get the word out to as many people as possible about his writing and so on. So it definitely has had a big impact on that. But the biggest impact of all is on my own writing. My main interest is creative writing novels, short stories especially. And I can kind of divide my work kind of pre-Gass and post-Gass. And in a nutshell, I'd say that what Gass taught me was not to be afraid of language. I kind of grew up in the Hemingway school of writing terse prose, but when I discovered Gass and saw what was possible on the page, it really unleashed a part of my writing that had been pretty much under wraps up until that point. I don't dare to compare myself to Gass, but in terms of that philosophy of emphasis on language and loving language on the page, that's been the biggest impact on me personally, but because it's been such a big impact on my writing.
How about you, Greg?
Yes, again, very similar to Ted. I was in the throes of reading a lot of Raymond Carver and Alice Munro, and I just needed something else. It wasn't working for me. I needed to find someone else, and it was him who just came into the picture, and I kind of, the essays and the fiction kind of went hand in hand. I started to review books like he had done early on. Even they say David Foster Wallace modeled his career after Gass in a way, at the beginning at least. And the essays kind of went hand in hand with the fiction, his and my own, because I think I had to write essays and book reviews to learn how to read and to learn how to write, and find my own style, and not following the plain styles of Monroe and Carver. Not to say that I'm a maximalist. I needed to find my own way, and I think Gass gave me the tools to discover something inside myself by pointing out, well, Stein, and when you see all these writers coming together, it's like you're at the altar with them all. So it was a very ennobling experience.
Well, those are great to hear. I mean, it sounds like, as expected, Gass was a life-changing writer for both of you, not only in his own writing, but how he introduced you to other writers, and how to read them, and how, that's pretty special. How about the resources that we have here at WashU? I know you both have dipped into them some here in person or online, and I thought I'd ask you both to maybe talk a little bit about how they may have enhanced your understanding or your appreciation for Gass.
Well, as you know, Joel, I have visited the archive a few times. It's sort of like the Holy Land for me. I get kind of goosebumps just whenever you start bringing out the folders. I haven't done much with the tunnel in terms of the archive there. It's just so overwhelming. But my main use of the Gass papers have been work that I've done on Willie Masters' Lonesome Wife, on Being Blue, and then In the Heart of the Country. And even just that fairly limited slice of Gass, there's just so much material there. It's just a wonderful resource. And when I teach Willie Masters' Lonesome Wife, which I'm actually doing right now in a course that I'm teaching, I tell my students, as wild as this book is in published form, you should have seen what he had in mind. Because if you go through those folders, oh my gosh, his creativity was just going, through the roof, and just a lot of it just couldn't be replicated. I'm not sure you could do it now graphically, even though the technology is so much more advanced. But yeah, so I haven't dipped into the tunnel stuff so much, but those other folders I've made quite a bit of use of, but still only barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, you'll have a lot more to get to in the future.
Absolutely.
How about you, Greg?
Well, I haven't gone into the archive physically, though I should have added that I did go and interview him in 2011. I flew to St. Louis and actually got to see him at WashU because there was an Elizabeth Bishop reading that he participated in. But I have gone to the Soul Inside the Sentence section online, and there's a bevy of wonderful things, some of which have not even been maybe transcribed or collected, but which should be. And I hope collected Gass essays will come out at some point, because there's introductions to, let's say, David Foster Wallace that are works of art themselves, which even Wallace says right after he's introduced. He said it's hard to follow that. So there are many wonderful items there, and it also shows you the pictures, all of the programs he participated in over the years, and kind of sad in that how many more events there used to be celebrating literature I understand we're in the pandemic, but it's a wonderful exhibit, and I hope people will go check it out.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, some of the audio recordings there that you won't find anywhere else. I should mention that currently using Firefox for those recordings is, it seems to be glitchy if you're using another browser, but I'm really proud of the site and what we were able to put up there. And including, unfortunately, very timely, there's a text of Gass's tribute to William Danforth, who just died last week. Very important chancellor for Washington University. But again, something that you won't find anywhere else, that's not published anywhere else. So yeah, I encourage you all to check that out, especially now when it's harder to get here in person to see the materials. So let's turn to the online symposium, Ted, that you put together. And I just would like you to say a few words about, how it came about, the contents, its intended audience, and how you'd like people to use it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, really, as soon as the lockdown began, I live in Illinois, so that was mid-March or so. Suddenly, the math just sort of dawned on me that the tunnel was turning 25 this year, having come out in 1995 originally. And so, I go to a lot of conferences and things. And oftentimes there are, milestone celebrations, for this book at 20 or 50 or 75 or 100 or whatever it might be. And I thought, well, 25 sounds like a good number to, to do some work on the tunnel and hopefully reintroduce it to readers who have not experienced it, maybe encourage scholars to take up the banner a little bit and do some more work with it. But obviously, because of the pandemic, some sort of physical conference or symposium was just not practical. It probably wouldn't have been practical even without the pandemic, quite honestly. But so I decided to do some sort of online symposium. So I got the website name, thetunnel25.com. And then I had to go about finding people to contribute. I knew Greg was in. Sorry, Greg, I knew you would contribute before I even asked you. And Joel, obviously, easy choice there. But between the two of you, and then I got some assistance from Catherine Gass, his daughter, and Mary, his widow, and we kind of just brainstormed a list of Gass people, if you will, people who have written about Gass in the past or have expressed, admiration or appreciation in one way or another. And I just rounded up a bunch of emails and started contacting people and got really positive responses from everyone I reached out to. Not everyone was able to contribute to the online symposium, but they kind of filtered in throughout the summer, and I posted them on the website, and it went live on Labor Day. There still may be, a couple of pieces out there that people are working on. It was difficult for people to write during the pandemic. I mean, we think about, well, it's hard to move around or go to restaurants or go to other countries or something. But there were a lot of people who were really stymied by the pandemic itself, getting a hold of secondary source material and things like that, because libraries were not loaning out things as readily or maybe at all because of the pandemic. So it presented some challenges in and of itself, but I'm really pleased with what we've ended up with. Your contributions, yours and Greg's, are terrific, and just really interesting variety of things. We have a couple of Gass scholars who have contributed. We have writers, we have artists, poets. People coming from all manner of different disciplines and interests, but the common thread is they all really appreciate William Gass and specifically the novel of The Tunnel. So it's been really neat to kind of see people coming out from so many different angles, but all landing in such a positive way. Yeah,
and it being presented as a sort of symposium, you're hoping also that it'll spark some discussion and some feedback from people.
Right. When I first envisioned it, I was thinking about things like this, quite honestly, Zoom chats and maybe recorded interviews, via video or Skype or whatever it might be. It hasn't been quite that dynamic, at least so far. but I do have the page set up where people can contribute comments, and I'd really love to see contributors start to sort of have a dialogue about the different pieces, and obviously people who didn't contribute to the symposium but are interested in gas in the tunnel. And so, yeah, it's open for dialogue and discourse. I really hope that part of the website gets very active as well.
And so it sounds like you do think there might grow a little bit too, as far as content goes. There might be more to come.
I think so. There's at least 2 or 3 other folks who had committed and were interested, but again, because of just life in some cases, or just for whatever reason, haven't been able to quite pull everything together. So I do look forward to maybe adding at least a couple more pieces, and who knows, maybe people will be inspired by the symposium itself and would like to contribute pieces. So maybe this would be a good opportunity to encourage anyone out there who would like to contribute to the symposium and join into the discussion. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, there's still time.
Absolutely.
And I can attest to the challenges that the lockdown presented in accessing the materials, even as a curator who usually has full access to them. It presented a challenge and added time to the process. So about reading the content of the symposium, it led to a couple questions that I had for both of you, and I thought I'd start with Greg. And getting at 3 aspects of the tunnel that people who know anything about the book, consider these things to be challenges: its length, the density of it, and the disturbing nature of the narrator and the narration. His many of his utterances are would be considered offensive, and so in your essay, you want us to face these challenges. I think you liken them to metaphors for memory or even life itself. And so I was wondering if you would share some of your thoughts today about the significance of the book in regard to those challenging aspects: its length, its density, and the sometimes repulsiveness of the narrator.
Yes, I've been rereading it again this summer, and just in the last days as well, and thinking that really this American novel, I think this is the riskiest American novel of the century, or what Gass did. J.R.R. by Gaddis might be the most form-shattering in terms of form, but this is just quite risky to put the whole voice of the book is William Kohler. It's kind of like Richard III, this awful character, even though Kohler only kills a cat. He's kind of a lowly character, but that's what you have for 652 pages. But I mean, you have that, but there are certain, as Gass said, he wanted to make it hard for people to get into the book. So there's false openings. There's 12 chapters or philippics. And really, the third philippic, starting around page 100, is sometimes called the true opening, where you start, it's kind of like an exorcism, a purge of this man's consciousness. And you start to get into the old memories, the growing up and the disappointments and the abusive parents, and how he's handed down the abuse to his wife and a couple of lovers he's had, colleagues, students. And I remember telling a friend who wanted to read it, but he didn't know if he could go along. And I was saying, yes, it's close to Gass's life in a way, but this is, Gass himself is someone who he might have come from something like this, but he made it through life to create this beauty. And what he creates for Kohler are these flashes of beauty. He begins wanting to be a poet, and slowly in the book you get these intense, vivid memories. And really, some of the passages are like reading Alice Munro, but much more lyrically, a much more lyric Alice Munro, like a Faulkner, because they're so vivid, but they cover the same territory, kind of a Midwest childhood, and the disappointments and the things that weigh us down. It plays a big role in the book. All of our possessions, and animism is also a key factor in the book that Kohler/Gass dwells on. Yeah.
It sounds like you find applicable, things that are applicable to the human condition. You're not just looking into some, the dark recesses of a kind of a despicable person in some ways. So there's that, and then also just the beauty of the language, I guess.
Yes. A critic said beauty without identification, which goes along with the risk that, this 26, 27 years in the making book came with. Why would he do that? Well, I think it's a great feat. And to tag on to what Ted said, about 15 to 20 people read this book this summer on Twitter under the hashtag Gas2020. So there has been a lot of renewed interest in it, and people, they made it through.
Yeah. No, it remains a book that I think, I hear from a number of people. It's been on their shelves a long time, and it may take them years before they get to it, or get up the courage for it or something. But once they do, they feel rewarded and wonder why it took them so long. Ted,
I would add, if I could,
go ahead.
I think Greg's description of the book is wonderful. But I was thinking, as we were getting ready for this talk, the one thing you never hear about the tunnel, I mean, you hear it's dark, it's dense, it can be difficult. You hear about Kohler being, kind of a rotten personality to spend 652 pages with, but at the same time, it's very funny. There are sections in the book that you just laugh out loud funny. Of course, that's Gass. I mean, Gass had a great sense of humor. You mentioned self-deprecation, and that's throughout the book as well. But the one thing no one ever talks about really is just all the really funny. Sometimes it's funny because of the language. Sometimes it's funny because of the imagery. There's all kinds of reasons for the humor. But I think we forget about that, and then that really, I think, lightens the load quite a bit. I mean, it can be quite an uphill climb in places, but you come across those really funny lines, pretty frequently in the book, and it really feels good when you get to them.
Yeah, and I have to say, I found it a book that I enjoy dipping into, even though it's, it is so long and dense. I do find it something that I can read a section here and there and really enjoy the language, the humor, the insight, especially if you know the premise of the book, the narrator, a lot of the characters, you can really get taken away by it. And you don't have to necessarily think, oh God, am I gonna really get through 600, however many pages of this in one sitting. Well, not in one sitting, but in a short amount of time. Maybe it's been done, but probably not by us. Well, let's talk about Kohler a little bit, Ted. You talk in your essay, one of your essays, one of your contributions to the site, about the identity of Kohler. And of course, this is another kind of big topic that came up when the book was published, and since then, is who is William Kohler really? Is he really just a stand-in for Gass himself? Is he, us? does he represent us? Is he an everyman in some way? And is he really almost, many of these other characters, these colleagues in the novel that he goes into great depth describing, is this really just his consciousness? Is he just a big liar who's making these stories up? So yeah, if you could summarize, in a little bit of time we have here, your thoughts on the identity of Kohler and how you think we should approach him.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really like what Greg had said about Kohler as well, and the fact that it was so risk-taking of Gass to construct a character that has so many similarities to himself. And he says, Gass did in several interviews, that he was really testing the reader to see, who could differentiate between himself and between him and Kohler. Just a little plug here, Heide Ziegler, who's one of the great Gass scholars, and was a friend and collaborator of Gass, but she has a wonderful essay talking about why we should be able to distinguish the voice of Gass from the voice of Kohler. And I'll just throw that out there. You can look that up. But I think that while Kohler obviously is a despicable character, and the phrase "the fascism of the heart" is one of those phrases associated with the tunnel. In other words, this idea that we're all capable of fascist tendencies, and people can be manipulated to following fascist leaders and so forth. And on the one hand, I think we all would want to think that that's not me. I couldn't be sucked down that path somehow. But one of Gass's favorite metaphors, and it's not just in the tunnel, it's throughout all of Gass, is the window. And there's a lot of discussion about the window in the tunnel, but you can find it in just about everything Gass wrote. And oftentimes the window seems to be suggestive of the writer as non-participant but close observer, kind of standing back and watching others. But there's also a lot of mirrors in the tunnel. I haven't bothered to count them or been able to count them, but it's also a regular metaphor in the tunnel particularly. And to me, Gass is putting those in there to show that we do need to look at ourselves and think about, our motivations and so forth. And one of the things that Gass talks about in his nonfiction, it's one of my favorite, Gass-isms, is his phrase, the importance of self-skepticism. In other words, that we have to be prepared to always examine our opinions in the light of new experiences, new information, and be prepared to change our opinions if need be. So I think that Gass suggests in the novel that we all could turn into Kohler, or at least some shade of gray of Kohler, if we're not careful and if we don't, pay attention to what we're doing and think about what we're doing, etc.
Yeah. I think we should turn it over to the audience questions. I'm seeing some come in here, and I want to make sure we have some time to get to some other people's questions. So I think Shannon might come in to help moderate that.
They have been pouring in by chat and email and all sorts of things. So question first for you, Joel. I know you referenced the fact that the library, most of the website information is available to anyone. Is there any way to access the archives now that the library is currently closed to the public?
Well, currently you can, if you have a valid WashU ID and make an appointment with us. We just ask that you consult with a curator first to see what you need and what we can get to you digitally. But we also are closed for outside of Washington University affiliated people currently because of the pandemic.
Okay. All right, great. Well, we've got lots of questions. There was a fun observation in the chat about the image of the medal for ingratitude, and it's probably a interpretation as an antibody attacking the corona of COVID-19. So that would be pretty timely. Cindy posed in the chat, is William Gass considered a guy's author? Is there a strong female following? Why do you think that is, or why not?
Greg, I'll let you field that one.
Well, I think yes. I think a little bit yes. there's Pynchon and Gaddis and Barthelme and Barth, the so-called black humorists. That's there, and I don't, you know, I've talked more to people, female writers who are more into the essays, let's say. But I think it kind of divides kind of along that, you know, that we were talking about how the tunnel is not as popular as, say, the two novellas in the heart of the country that are almost textbook examples that John Gardner writes about in his book. He writes about the Pedersen Kid. So people know more about Gass through those pieces, and then laterally through the essays. So there's that risk, but I don't think that Gass celebrates a lot of female writers, especially Gertrude Stein. So I don't see him going down that rabbit hole of all guys. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, and we have a comment in the chat from Garth about Gass was a great lover and advocate for Colette, Catherine Ann Porter, Gertrude Stein, Elizabeth, on and on. So
yes.
Thank you. Very good. I had an email question from an alum who kind of missed out on studying with Gass when she was an undergraduate, but she poses a question: what was going on in Gass's personal and professional life when he wrote The Tunnel, and how does it relate to his other work? Ted, can you take that one?
Yeah, let me handle the second part first. Gass has said that two early pieces, one in the heart of the country, was really on his mind as a source of inspiration for the structure of the tunnel. And then Ferber's monologue in Omensetter's Luck served as sort of the voice of Kohler, at least the early version thereof. So in terms of source material, Gass was definitely working from those two early pieces as his inspiration for the tunnel. In terms of what he was doing for 26 years or so, he said that he very much preferred to be working on creative writing, and specifically the tunnel. And if you read some of the early interviews, he thought it would only take him 2 or 3 years to write the tunnel. He was off by just a little bit there. But what he also said was that he kept getting offers and requests to write reviews, to write essays, to go and give talks here and there, and they were always paying gigs. Whereas, fiction didn't necessarily, earn him a lot of money, and he, was trying to raise a family, among other things. And so he was often getting pulled off the creative writing to put his energies elsewhere. So that was one of the reasons why instead of 2 or 3 years, it took 26 or so.
Very good. All right, we have a very active chat, and I'm going to hope we can get through all of them. So James Elkins writes, you've been talking about the beauty of the language, and beauty is a word that's also used in the Joyce literature to describe what keeps readers faithful to the project of reading Finnegan's Wake. He's been running 2 Finnegan's Wake reading groups this summer, and they've been fretting about that word. How could the beauty of the tunnel be described? Is it, for example, partly a sort of impossible exuberance? Or at the level of words, is it beauty in relation to more expected kinds of modernist beauty? In which case, what kinds? I know that's a lot, so it's in the chat if you'd like.
I'm going to pass to Ted or Greg on this.
Maybe I'll jump in there real quickly. Gass always talked about writing for the ear. And to me, one of the reasons it takes me so long to read Gass is because I keep stopping and listening to the sentences. And so I think in terms of the beauty, it's a poetic, lyrical, a literal, like as if singing sort of beauty. Obviously there's a lot of interesting stuff going on the page in terms of typography and, graphics and cartoons and all kinds of things, but it's all to the greater purpose of the sound of the language. And so I think when it comes to beauty, and for me at least, it's the sound of it as much as the actual appearance on the page.
Yes, I would back that up. I've read sections of the tunnel out loud to people numerous times, even this summer I went back to it, and it's hearing this language that has no cliche whatsoever in it. Everything is fresh, everything is vivid, and he's using often very simple words to create things that no one else could write. So, I mean, at this time in America, let's say, yes, Joyce could write these things, of course, but there's no mistaking that William Gass wrote the sentence was his great study, the soul inside the sentence. This was his program in life, and he unfolds a lot of his ideas from the essays into the tunnel. The book as a container of consciousness is repeated, and his great love of Rilke comes out, and he's even rewriting some of Rilke's famous the song of the idiot, the drunkard song at the end of the tunnel. Gass did an entire book devoted reading Rilke and the problem with translation. So,
well, if I could kind of piggyback on that and bring the archive into this, Joel, if I could. One of the things I found fascinating when I was looking through the Gass papers, I think it is in the Willie Masters section. Of course, one of the reasons you have so many Gass papers is because he was such a devoted revisionist. I mean, there's just draft after draft after draft, all manually, typewritten until into the 21st century, basically. But one of the things I was really fascinated by was in the margins against the paragraphs, he actually is scanning his sentences like lines of poetry. And so he's working on it as this sort of poetry, even though it's taking the form of prose. And that just so much reinforces this idea of the sound of the language as much as anything. And that was just so cool to see his handwritten scansion of his own material until he just got the rhythm just perfect. And it might take him 50 drafts of one paragraph to get there, but he got there eventually. Yeah,
you're right. There are that many pages of one paragraph, and it's really fascinating to see. And on the Soul Inside the Sentence, as well as on your website, the Tunnel website, there are a lot of scans that show these working drafts, which are really fascinating. And it goes to show, when we bring these out for students, that this master of language and writing, it didn't just come to him out of the heavens. It was a lot of work, and he put a lot of sweat into it, a lot of attempts.
We have another question from Ryan. Did Gass identify any literary precedents for the tunnel? They'd be interested in learning about novels which might have informed the tunnel, or that be considered spiritual siblings of sorts.
Well, in retrospect, there were a lot of critics, a lot of readers over those 26 years who thought they had found other novels or movies titled The Tunnel, maybe in other languages, etc. And Gass tended to claim that he was made aware of those after the fact. He claims that when he was a child, he had all these daydreams about tunnels and interiority, and that the inspiration for the book really came from his childhood and his interest in tunnels. And then as he got older and literate and started working on the book and became aware of these other sort of analogs, then obviously they may have contributed to his thinking about the book. But he always claimed that it was his childhood fascination with tunnels that really led to his adult fascination and his writing of the book.
Has anyone collected a comprehensive list of all the metaphors Bill uses throughout the tunnel?
That was asked by Culp, by the way. Did you guys see that?
Not that I know of. No, I emailed Ted about, have you ever thought of doing the annotations to the tunnel? And Ted knows it would be a long, arduous process.
It would. I think I could be probably talked into at least starting the process, but it's a book that really begs for that. And one of my, I mentioned one of my inspirations for the symposium was to try to get both the casual reader, the reader who just is interested in a really interesting read, but also to try to drum up a little more scholarly attention to the tunnel in particular, but all of Gas. But it certainly is a book that kind of begs for that sort of annotative, scholarly approach. So maybe Greg, you and I need to talk about that a little bit more.
Well, and also apparently Stephen King read the tunnel and held it up at one of his readings one day and said, "You all need to read this book." And I think someone told Gass that and he couldn't believe it, but it's apparently true.
Having spent much of the summer, this is Edmund Acosta, having spent much of the summer reading Wallace's Infinite Jest, why did Gass and Wallace so challenge the reader?
Go ahead, Greg.
Why did they challenge the reader?
Why did they challenge?
Well, it wouldn't be as interesting to them if they didn't, I think. And I think they both had these incredible minds that worked this way, where, though it's a little different, I think Gass, you can read Gass out loud, but I think it's very hard to read Foster Wallace out loud. It's much more in the mind, and the language, it doesn't, there aren't these places to stop and in oratory to get your footholds like there are in Gass. As Ted was saying, just reading the end, 5 of the last 6 lines end in rhymes in the tunnel. High, sorrows sighed, and going through the tunnel, I could hear this in my inner ear. I could see those sections where I was reading, poetry, essentially. You could break it down, and it's just a wonderful, you want something that doesn't have cliches in it, and that has something to move you. That's why we still read Joyce and Nabokov, and that's why we'll still be reading Gass in 100 years.
Okay, I have one question. I know we're coming right up on the end of our time, and we do still have some questions. I promise if you have emailed a question and we didn't get to answer it live, we will have our panelists respond to that question via email. But one closing question for all of you is, for a newbie to Gass, someone who hasn't read William Gass before but is interested in it, where do we start? Is this a start with the tunnel, or is that going to send us off, or should we start with the novellas? What would you all suggest? I'd love to hear all 3 of you.
Well, I teach Gass to 17 and 18-year-olds, and I always start them with the Peterson Kid. It's the only sort of plot-driven Gass out there, and I tell them this isn't really, a great introduction to Gass because he wasn't quite Gass yet, but it is plot-driven, and there's a lot of, obviously, Gass in there. So that would be my recommendation. So start them off with something that has something of a plot, and then move on to everything else.
And I would say I agree with that. And also, as far as novels go, Middle C, I think, is a really, it's very Gassian. It's very, he goes into amazing passages about music and gardens and libraries. But I think it's also more plot driven a little more than maybe The Tunnel is. And I really enjoyed that book a lot.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, if you're a young writer looking for inspiration, go to the essays, especially finding a form, the title essay and finding a form. I did a lecture and I had students read that and they responded very well because it's about finding your form to write fiction.
Very good, thank you. Joel, I'll leave it to you to close us up.
Great, okay. Before we go, I just want to say thanks again to Ted and Greg for the great discussion, and also to Mary and Catherine Gass, who are in attendance today. And I want to thank everyone who supports the libraries and its collections with your financial resources. We appreciate your support. And lastly, before we go, we have a few upcoming events that we want to bring to your attention. Tomorrow at 3, we have our virtual book club. Next Tuesday, September 29th at 4:30, we have a faculty book talk with Professor Rebecca Wanzo. And then on Wednesday, October 21st, I'll be back for presenting on River Styx, Liberating Spoken Word. So we hope to see you at one of these events or something in the near future. And last, I'll mention we're going to have a survey come out tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that in your email. Please give us your feedback. We'd love to hear it. It helps us for future events. So thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.